The laughter came easily to him. A quick glance, a loud comment, a cheap dress joke made just close enough for donors, board members, and cameras to hear. In a room built on prestige and generosity, Daniel Baker chose cruelty, and chose it publicly. Brooke Baker did not respond. She did not flinch. She stood still beneath the sponsor wall, silent as his words traveled faster than he realized. Somewhere between a signed contract, a time-stamped email, and a bank ledger already in motion, the outcome of that laugh had been decided long before it echoed. If you believe silence is not weakness, don't look away yet. This story isn't about revenge, it's about what happens when dignity meets documented truth. Stay with us until the end. Share where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And if stories about quiet strength and real justice matter to you, consider subscribing. Brooke Baker learned early that the loudest person in the room was rarely the one in control. She had grown up watching systems, not speeches. Her father had been an accountant for a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Ohio. Nothing glamorous, nothing powerful on the surface. But at night, at the kitchen table, he would show her spreadsheets the way other parents showed photo albums. Rows of numbers, footnotes, timelines. He taught her that truth didn't argue. It waited. And when it surfaced, it didn't need to raise its voice. That lesson stayed with her. By the time Brooke married Daniel Baker, she already understood how people mistook composure for passivity. Daniel was charming in the way that worked best in public spaces. He laughed easily, spoke quickly, and filled silence before it could grow uncomfortable. He had a talent for making people feel included, as long as they were useful to the version of himself he was trying to present. In the early years of their marriage, that charm had felt like confidence. Brooke admired how effortlessly he navigated rooms she preferred to observe from the edges. When they attended events together, Daniel would place a guiding hand at the small of her back, steering her toward conversations, introductions, laughter. People liked him. People remembered him. And Brooke, quieter by nature, was content to let him take the lead. But over time, the hand became a signal rather than a gesture. A reminder of where she was expected to stand, when to speak, when not to. Daniel worked in corporate development for a regional investment firm, respectable, upward-facing, perpetually hungry for proximity to bigger names. He talked often about optics and positioning, about how success wasn't just earned but seen. Brooke listened. She always listened. And she noticed how his tone shifted depending on the audience, how humility appeared in front of superiors and disappeared around those he believed held less value. Their marriage settled into an unspoken arrangement. Daniel managed appearances. Brooke managed reality. She had her own work, though Daniel rarely described it accurately when asked. Consulting, he would say vaguely. Or, she helps nonprofits with finances. He made it sound small, almost accidental, like a hobby that filled time rather than shaped outcomes. Brooke never corrected him. Not because she agreed, but because she understood the cost of explanation. What Daniel didn't grasp was that Brooke's world ran parallel to his, not beneath it. Her days were structured and deliberate. She kept meticulous records, not out of paranoia, but discipline. Emails archived, contracts reviewed twice, meetings summarized in neutral language. Brooke believed that memory was unreliable, but documentation was not. She never raised her voice in meetings. She never needed to. When she spoke, it was because the groundwork had already been laid. She also believed deeply in process. That belief was what separated her from Daniel most clearly. He believed in moments, big impressions, well-timed jokes, bold gestures. Brooke believed in sequences, cause and effect, step followed by consequence. She trusted systems because systems, when designed correctly, did not care who shouted the loudest. The gala that evening was not, as Daniel assumed, just another networking opportunity. For Brooke, it was the culmination of months of quiet coordination. The event supported a citywide arts and youth education initiative, one she had followed for years. She believed in its mission not because it looked good on paper, but because she had reviewed the numbers herself. She had visited programs without press, spoken to directors when no one was watching. When the board needed funding to expand, Brooke didn't attend the pitch meeting. She didn't sit at the table or shake hands. She worked through her attorney, Michael Grant, and through her foundation, the Baker Civic Trust. The commitment was substantial, structured carefully, conditional as all serious contributions were. Her name appeared in documents, not brochures, on contracts, not posters. Daniel knew none of this, not because Brooke hid it maliciously, but because he had never asked with genuine curiosity. When she mentioned meetings, he assumed they were minor. When she referenced legal review, he assumed she was being overly cautious. His world rewarded certainty performed loudly. Hers rewarded accuracy achieved quietly. That disconnect had grown sharper over time. In private, Daniel often framed Brooke's restraint as a flaw. You could do more, he would say, if you just spoke up. But what he meant was if she spoke like him. If she occupied space the way he believed power should look, Brooke never argued. She simply adjusted. She took notes, mental at first, then written, noting patterns, the way his respect shifted depending on who was present, the way humor became sharper in rooms full of witnesses, the way her silence was reinterpreted as permission. The gala would be different, she knew. Not because she planned to confront him. She never planned confrontations. But because the stakes were higher than Daniel realized. As they prepared that evening, Brooke chose her dress with care. Not to impress, not to provoke. She chose something simple, understated, almost forgettable. Comfort mattered more than appearance. Blending mattered more than standing out. She anticipated Daniel's reaction before he voiced it. When he saw the dress, his expression tightened. "That's what you're wearing?" he asked, already halfway to irritation. "It works," Brooke replied. "For this." He gestured vaguely as if the room itself demanded a different version of her. She said nothing more. Silence was not retreat. It was alignment with facts Daniel didn't have. On the drive to the venue, Daniel spoke about donors he hoped to impress, about people he wanted to run into. Brooke watched the city lights pass the window. Her phone vibrated once in her bag. An email notification. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She already knew what it contained. As they arrived, the building glowed with intention. Valets in crisp jackets. Staff moving with rehearsed efficiency. A sponsor wall positioned just inside the entrance, polished and illuminated. Daniel straightened his jacket, inhaled confidence, and stepped forward. Brooke followed at an unhurried pace. She was not there to be seen. She was there because the structure of the evening depended on her presence, whether anyone recognized it yet or not. And as she crossed the threshold into the gala, Brooke Baker carried with her the quiet certainty of someone who understood the difference between attention and authority. The dress did exactly what Brooke Baker intended. It did not announce her. It did not shimmer beneath the lights or demand interpretation. It moved with her body instead of against it, a quiet fabric in a room designed to amplify spectacle. To Daniel, it looked like a mistake. To Brooke, it looked like neutrality, useful, unprovocative, and free of obligation. They moved through the entryway, where guests paused for photos, where names were exchanged, and titles offered like currency. Daniel's voice rose and fell, easily calibrated to impress. He introduced himself with confidence, and Brooke with brevity. "My wife," he said, as if the category explained everything. She nodded politely. She smiled when required. She listened. As they passed the sponsor wall, Daniel slowed, scanning the names. His eyes lit up when he recognized a firm he admired. He didn't notice how Brooke's gaze lingered for a fraction of a second longer than his, or how she read the structure of the list rather than the branding. She noted hierarchy, placement, the subtle difference between visibility and control. Inside the main hall, the noise thickened. Glasses clinked. A string quartet warmed up near the stage. Servers moved in smooth arcs, balancing trays and conversations. The room was beautiful in the way money preferred to present itself, polished, intentional, curated. Daniel leaned close to Brooke. "You see this crowd?" he said, a smile fixed in place. "This is exactly why presentation matters." She didn't respond. He glanced down at her dress again, less subtly this time. His jaw tightened, irritation now sharpened by the presence of others. "I just don't get it," he added. "You could have worn something nicer, something that fits the room." Brooke met his eyes. "I am," she said evenly. Daniel scoffed, the sound small but dismissive. "Right." They joined a circle of donors Daniel had been hoping to encounter. Introductions flowed. Laughter followed. Someone commented on the venue. Someone else mentioned a recent acquisition. Daniel nodded enthusiastically, inserting himself where possible, amplifying his relevance. Brooke stood slightly behind him, as she often did. Not hidden, simply unassertive. It was there in that small pocket of attention that Daniel made his first mistake of the night. He gestured toward Brooke's dress with a laugh that traveled too far. "We had a whole debate about this," he said, inviting the group in. "I told her this isn't a budget dinner, it's a gala." A few people chuckled, not because it was particularly funny, but because laughter was the currency of belonging. Brooke felt the shift instantly. The air changed. Not dramatically, just enough. She looked at the faces around them. She catalogued reactions. The man to Daniel's left smiled politely, but didn't laugh. The woman across from them glanced down at her drink, discomfort flickering before she masked it. Another guest raised his phone, pretending to check a message, but the camera lens angled just slightly upward. Daniel didn't notice any of it. He was too busy enjoying the ease of being supported. "You know how it is," he continued. "Some people just don't think about how things look." The words landed where he intended them to, on Brooke, in front of witnesses. She felt the familiar urge to clarify, to correct the narrative before it hardened. But she had learned long ago that explanations offered in moments of public imbalance rarely changed outcomes. They simply prolonged them. Instead, she stayed still. Brooke had a habit in moments like this. She imagined the scene as if it were already documented. She noted the time, the phrasing, the witnesses. She did not attach emotion to it. Emotion complicated memory. Precision preserved it. A few steps away, Lauren Miles, the event director, paused mid-conversation. Her eyes flicked toward Brooke, recognition sparking briefly before discipline took over. Lauren had reviewed the sponsor documents more times than she could count. She knew exactly who Brooke Baker was. Their eyes met for half a second. Lauren did not smile. She did not nod. She simply acknowledged Brooke's presence with a neutral glance and turned back to her responsibilities. It was the kind of restraint that signaled respect without exposure. Brooke appreciated it. Daniel, emboldened, leaned closer to another donor. "Honestly," he said, lowering his voice just enough to imply intimacy, "she hates this stuff. I had to drag her here." Brooke's mouth curved into a faint, polite smile. She let the statement exist without contest. The truth did not require defense. They moved on, drifting toward the bar. Daniel ordered confidently. Brooke declined. She preferred clarity. As the evening progressed, Daniel's commentary sharpened. Each remark built upon the last, buoyed by laughter that reinforced his sense of control. He commented on the crowd, on the decor, on Brooke's lack of enthusiasm. "See," he said at one point, gesturing broadly. "Everyone else gets it." Brooke looked around the room. She saw staff adjusting seating arrangements with quiet urgency. She saw Thomas Reed, the bank representative, checking his phone with growing focus. She saw Vanessa Cole from PR scanning the room, her expression tight with calculation. The system was moving. Slowly, precisely. Brooke's phone vibrated again in her bag. She didn't check it. She already knew what the next steps looked like. Michael Grant would be monitoring compliance. Lauren would be logging incidents. The contract did not require confrontation. It required documentation. Daniel mistook her silence for agreement. "You're not mad, right?" he asked lightly, though his tone suggested he expected her to be grateful for the attention. "No," Brooke said truthfully, because anger was not the emotion that defined moments like this. Clarity was. They approached the seating area, where staff guided guests toward their tables. Daniel glanced at the placement cards and frowned. Brooke's name appeared closer to the stage than he expected. "That can't be right," he said, already waving a staff member over. Brooke watched the interaction unfold. She noted the staffer's hesitation, the quick scan of the list, the subtle stiffening of posture. She did not intervene. Daniel leaned back toward her, voice sharp. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll fix this." Brooke met his gaze calmly. "You don't need to." He laughed, dismissive. "Trust me." As he stepped away, Brooke exhaled quietly. Not in relief, in preparation. The dress had done its job. It had revealed what Daniel believed about her when he thought the room belonged to him. It had invited him to speak freely, to display assumptions he usually disguised. And in doing so, it had created something far more valuable than an argument. It had created a record. The gala did not unfold as a single event. It unfolded as a machine. From the outside, it appeared effortless music drifting through the hall, laughter overlapping in carefully timed crescendos, servers gliding as if on cue. But Brooke Baker knew better. Events like this were not performances. They were systems. Systems built on schedules, contracts, contingencies, and people trained to correct deviations without drawing attention to them. She watched the machine operate as Daniel moved ahead, already shaking hands, already inserting himself into conversations that carried perceived weight. His confidence sharpened as the room filled. The more people gathered, the more certain he became of his position within them. Brooke let him go. She paused near the entrance long enough to orient herself. She took in the sight lines, the stage, the sponsor screens, the donor tables arranged by tier rather than name. She noticed where staff clustered and where they avoided standing too long. She clocked the rhythm of the room, how conversations surged and ebbed around the bar, how the perimeter filled with those waiting to be noticed. Everything confirmed. What she already understood this evening was less about generosity than alignment. She moved forward at her own pace. A server passed offering champagne. Brooke declined with a slight smile. She preferred to remain clear-headed. Another guest brushed past her shoulder, murmuring an apology without looking up. Brooke returned it reflexively. Politeness, she had learned, was often mistaken for submission. Near the center of the room, a large digital screen cycled through sponsor acknowledgments. Logos appeared and dissolved into the next, accompanied by soft music. Most guests barely noticed. Brooke did. She observed the order, the pacing, which names appeared longest. Her phone vibrated again. This time she checked it. The email was brief. Subject line neutral. Language formal. Received and logged. Monitoring. Michael Grant never wasted words. He didn't need to. His job was not to interpret emotions, but to verify compliance. Brooke slid the phone back into her bag without responding. Daniel reappeared at her side, energized. "You disappeared," he said, as if her movement required explanation. "I was right there," Brooke replied. He laughed, dismissive. "You know what I mean." He guided her toward another cluster of guests, board adjacent, judging by their posture and the way staff deferred to them. Brooke recognized Margaret Holloway immediately. The board chair had a presence that did not demand attention, only acknowledgement. Her authority was quiet, built over decades, rather than announced in moments. Daniel launched into introductions, eager to align himself with influence. "Daniel Baker," he said brightly. "We've met before, briefly." Margaret nodded politely. "Yes," she said, her tone noncommittal. "This is my wife," Daniel added, gesturing toward Brooke. "Brooke Baker," Brooke said, meeting Margaret's eyes. There was a flicker of recognition, fast, controlled, professional. Margaret did not react outwardly. She had learned long ago that recognition did not always serve the room. "It's good to have you here," Margaret said evenly. The conversation shifted to funding goals, to expansion plans, to the importance of visibility. Daniel nodded enthusiastically, offering commentary that echoed what he thought the group wanted to hear. Brooke listened, noting how often words like impact were used without accompanying specifics. As the group dispersed, Vanessa Cole from PR approached Margaret with quiet urgency. Brooke caught fragments of their exchange, something about timing, about sponsor acknowledgments during the program. Margaret listened without interruption. The machine adjusted. Daniel leaned toward Brooke again. "See," he said. "This is how things move." Brooke did not correct him. She simply observed the movement he mistook for momentum. They were guided toward their table. The seating cards were placed with mathematical precision, each position reflecting status contribution and negotiation. Brooke saw her name printed closer to the stage than Daniel's. Daniel noticed too. "That's odd," he muttered. "They must have made a mistake." A staff member approached, tablet in hand. "Mr. Baker," she said politely. Daniel straightened. "Yes, there's a small adjustment we need to make." She continued, glancing briefly at Brooke before returning her gaze to Daniel. "I thought so," Daniel said, already asserting control. "My wife doesn't need to be up there. She'll be more comfortable somewhere else." The staff member hesitated. Brooke watched the hesitation closely. It was the kind of pause that indicated conflicting instructions. Protocol against assumption. She recognized it immediately. "That's fine," Brooke said calmly before the staff member could respond. Daniel shot her a look. "I've got it," he said, irritation seeping through his smile. The staff member nodded, relieved at the resolution, and adjusted the seating card accordingly. Brooke took the new place without comment. Across the room, Lauren Miles noticed the change. She frowned slightly and made a note on her tablet. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. As guests settled, the room shifted from fluid mingling to structured anticipation. The lights dimmed slightly, the music softened, attention angled toward the stage. Daniel leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He glanced at Brooke, then at her dress, and smirked. "At least you're comfortable," he whispered, as if offering consolation. Brooke met his gaze briefly. Her expression was neutral, unreadable. On the other side of the room, Thomas Reed checked his phone again. His brow furrowed. He stepped away from his table and moved toward the edge of the hall where staff communication flowed more freely. The machine did not rush. It recalibrated. As the first speaker approached the podium, Brooke felt the weight of the room settle. She did not feel anxious. She felt aligned. Every element she needed was already in motion, documented, time-stamped, verified. Daniel clapped enthusiastically as introductions began. He did not notice the subtle shift in staff behavior, the way certain glances lingered longer than before, the way conversations hushed around him without explanation. Brooke noticed everything. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and faced forward. Her posture was composed, unremarkable. She blended seamlessly into the audience. And yet the structure of the evening, its funding, its flow, its consequences rested quietly on her presence. The machine continued to run. Daniel Baker discovered that humiliation, when rewarded, became a habit. It began as commentary masked as humor, small, sharp remarks designed to invite agreement. When a nearby table laughed, Daniel leaned into it, encouraged by the ease with which the room accepted his framing. He had always believed that confidence meant control, and control meant speaking first, loudest, and often. As the program paused between speakers, conversation swelled again. Daniel stood glass in hand, drifting toward another circle of donors. Brooke followed at a measured distance, close enough to be included, far enough to remain peripheral. "This crowd's impressive," one man said. "You must be proud to be part of it." Daniel smiled broadly. "Someone has to keep up," he replied, then glanced back at Brooke. "I'm still working on that." The laugh came quickly, too quickly. It ricocheted through the group, light and careless. Brooke felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not from hurt, but from recognition. This was escalation. Daniel no longer needed to test the room. He knew it would carry him. "You know," Daniel continued, lowering his voice as if sharing something intimate, "I keep telling her, if you're going to show up to these things, you've got to at least try." Someone chuckled again. Another guest offered a sympathetic smile in Brooke's direction, then looked away. Brooke said nothing. She shifted her weight slightly and studied the faces around them. She noted who laughed openly, who smiled without sound, who kept their expressions carefully neutral. She recognized the difference between discomfort and complicity. Both mattered. Both were evidence. A woman near the edge of the group cleared her throat. "It's a beautiful dress," she offered, attempting to soften the moment. Daniel waved it off. "Comfortable, sure. Appropriate," he shrugged. "Depends how seriously you take the night." The words landed with intention. Brooke's silence did not read as submission to everyone. To some it registered as restraint, to others as resignation. Daniel interpreted it only one way: permission. He leaned closer to a colleague from his firm. "Honestly," he said, not bothering to lower his voice this time, "she doesn't really get what all this means. I keep telling her this stuff matters." The colleague nodded awkwardly. "Yeah," he said. "Of course." Brooke met the colleague's eyes briefly. There was something there, regret perhaps, or awareness. It didn't matter. The record was forming either way. Phones were no longer discreet. A few guests held theirs openly now, screens glowing faintly. Some filmed the stage. Others angled lenses toward conversations they pretended not to notice. Daniel's voice, sharpened by wine and validation, carried further than he realized. Vanessa Cole stood near the perimeter, scanning the room with increasing concern. As PR lead, she was trained to detect risk before it metastasized. She clocked Daniel's behavior instantly. Public mockery repeated, targeting a spouse on camera. It was the kind of narrative that unraveled sponsorship goodwill if left unchecked. She moved toward him, intercepting with a professional smile. "Daniel, isn't it?" she said brightly. "We're about to resume the program. We'll need guests seated." Daniel grinned, interpreting her presence as acknowledgement. "Of course," he said, "just making sure everyone's enjoying themselves." Vanessa's eyes flicked to Brooke, then back to Daniel. "Of course," she repeated, tone neutral. Brooke inclined her head slightly, a gesture of thanks without alliance. Vanessa moved on, already typing a note into her phone. As guests returned to their tables, Daniel leaned toward Brooke, irritation creeping back in. "You see," he murmured, "even PR gets it. This isn't the time to look uninvested." Brooke folded her napkin carefully. "I'm here," she said. Daniel scoffed, physically. The lights dimmed again as the next speaker took the stage. Applause followed. Daniel clapped enthusiastically, buoyed by his sense of command. Brooke clapped politely, her expression unchanged. From the stage, the speaker spoke about impact, about community, about the generosity of those who made the evening possible. The words flowed smoothly, practiced, and reassuring. Brooke listened for what wasn't said. She noticed Thomas Reed step quietly toward Margaret Holloway, leaning in to speak. Margaret's expression tightened just slightly enough to register concern. She nodded once curtly. The machine adjusted again. Daniel noticed none of it. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied, and glanced at Brooke with a smirk. "At least you're getting a free dinner out of it," he said under his breath. The comment drew a few sideways looks from nearby guests. One woman frowned. Another shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Someone across the aisle raised their phone a little higher. Brooke did not respond. She focused instead on the sensation of the chair beneath her, the hum of the lights overhead, the steady rhythm of her breath. Emotional restraint was not denial. It was strategy. She had learned that reacting publicly would only redirect attention away from the behavior itself. Let it stand. Let it be seen. As the applause faded, Brooke reached into her bag and removed a small notebook. She did not write immediately. She waited, listening to the speaker's cadence, allowing the moment to settle. Then she wrote a single line. Repeated public mockery. Multiple witnesses. Recorded. She closed the notebook and returned it to her bag. Daniel leaned over. "Seriously," he whispered, irritation sharpening. "You're taking notes now?" Brooke met his gaze calmly. "Yes," for what he demanded. She held his eyes for a moment longer than usual. For accuracy. He laughed, dismissive. "You're unbelievable." Brooke turned back toward the stage. Accuracy was not unbelievable. It was inevitable. As the program continued, the room's attention shifted, but the undercurrent remained. Guests whispered, staff exchanged looks, phones buzzed quietly. The narrative Daniel had tried to control began to drift beyond his reach. Public cruelty had a way of doing that. It invited witnesses, and witnesses in rooms like this carried weight. Brooke remained still, her posture composed, her presence unremarkable. She did not seek sympathy. She did not demand intervention. She allowed the room to see what it needed to see. And in doing so, she let Daniel's words become what they already were. Evidence. What the room did not know, what it could not know yet, was that the evening had already crossed a threshold. Brooke Baker had learned long ago that influence rarely announced itself. It moved quietly through channels designed to outlast emotion. While Daniel mistook visibility for power, Brooke trusted structure, and structure was already responding. Months earlier, when the board's funding committee had circulated its proposal, Brooke had reviewed it with the same care she applied to everything else. She did not attend the meeting. She did not introduce herself. She read the numbers, the projected outcomes, the contingency language buried in the appendices. She noted where optimism replaced evidence and where safeguards were thin. Her response came through Michael Grant. Michael was not a dramatic attorney. He disliked grandstanding and avoided adjectives whenever possible. His emails were spare, his calls efficient. When he represented Brooke, he did so by removing friction, not creating it. The Baker Civic Trust sponsorship agreement was precise. Funds were committed through a controlled disbursement structure released in stages. The language was clear about expectations, financial transparency, program integrity, and critically reputational conduct, not as a threat, as a condition. Brooke believed that money carried responsibility, not just for how it was spent, but for the environment it shaped. Public events created narratives. Narratives created associations, and associations once formed were difficult to undo. The clause was simple. If conduct by key participants materially undermined the event's integrity or mission, the sponsor reserved the right to pause or review funding pending board acknowledgement. No one expected it to matter. These clauses rarely did. They existed to reassure donors not to be enforced. But clauses did not require expectation. They required conditions. Michael had been monitoring the event remotely. He had access to the live feed, to staff communication logs, to the reporting channel established for sponsor concerns. He did not react to the first remark, or the second. He waited. Patterns mattered more than moments. When Lauren Miles submitted her first note brief, factual, unemotional, Michael read it carefully. He checked the timestamp. He cross-referenced it with the feed. He opened a new document and began logging. Brooke did not need updates. She trusted process. If the threshold were crossed, Michael would act. If it were not, nothing would change. Either outcome was acceptable to her. Back in the hall, Daniel leaned toward a guest and laughed again, his confidence unbroken. He had no awareness of the parallel world moving beside him, the emails exchanged without tone, the notes logged without judgment, the mechanisms designed to respond without spectacle. Thomas Reed felt the shift before anyone else. As the bank's relationship manager for the event's primary accounts, he was attuned to anomalies. His role was not to interpret behavior, but to ensure alignment between agreements and execution. When the compliance alert appeared on his phone, routine language, no urgency implied. He frowned. Sponsor review flag triggered. Verification pending. Thomas did not panic. He never did. Panic created errors. Instead, he excused himself quietly and moved toward the service corridor where reception was stronger and conversations were not overheard. He called the internal line listed on the alert. A colleague answered, voice neutral. "We've received a preliminary incident log," she said. "No action yet, just verification." "Understood," Thomas replied. "I'll notify the board liaison." He did not elaborate. He did not speculate. Back at the table, Daniel noticed Thomas's departure only in passing. "Important guy," he muttered to Brooke. Always running numbers. Brooke did not respond. The next speaker took the stage discussing expansion plans with polished enthusiasm. Slides advanced. Applause followed. The machine maintained its rhythm. Behind the scenes, Lauren Miles reviewed the seating change Daniel had forced earlier. She compared it against the sponsor protocol. The conflict was clear. She added a note to the incident log, again factual again, without interpretation. Vanessa Cole received a brief message from a junior associate. Multiple guests recording spousal remarks. Tone negative, potential optics issue. Vanessa exhaled slowly. She forwarded the message to herself, flagged it, and began drafting contingencies. She did not confront Daniel again. That would escalate. Instead, she prepared statements that might never be used. This was how institutions protected themselves. Not through reaction, but preparation. Brooke watched the room with steady focus. She noticed the subtle changes, the way staff clustered more tightly, the way conversations shortened, the way certain glances lingered on Daniel a fraction longer than before. Nothing dramatic, just enough. Her phone vibrated once more. This time she glanced at it. Threshold met. Proceeding per agreement. She read the message without expression. No satisfaction followed, no relief, just acknowledgement. She typed a brief reply. Understood. Maintain continuity for beneficiaries. Michael would handle the rest. Daniel leaned back in his chair, oblivious. "See?" he said quietly. "Everything's fine." Brooke folded her hands. "Yes," she said, because from her perspective, it was. The evening had not yet reached its visible turning point. That would come later, when processes surfaced and decisions required acknowledgement. For now, the machine continued to run, adjusting incrementally. The power of the system lay in its patience. As the program transitioned toward its midpoint, Margaret Holloway received a discreet update from Thomas Reed. Her expression tightened, then smoothed. She nodded once. "Thank you," she said. "Keep me informed." Margaret did not look toward Brooke. She did not need to. Recognition was not the same as action. Daniel stood to stretch, confident, unaware that the narrative he had authored was no longer his to control. His laughter earlier had felt harmless to him, just words, just moments. He did not understand that institutions did not evaluate intent. They evaluated impact. Brooke watched him with calm detachment. This was not the first time she had seen someone mistake access for authority. It would not be the last. She adjusted her posture slightly, settling more comfortably into her seat. The dress remained unremarkable. The room remained beautiful. The machine remained precise. And beneath it all, the agreement held. The seating card became the moment Daniel chose to make his authority visible. It was a small thing. Paper stock heavy enough to feel official ink. Precise, the name printed in a font that suggested care. Daniel picked it up, read it once, then again. His jaw tightened. He glanced toward the stage, calculating distance, prestige optics. Brooke watched him without comment. "This isn't right," he said, already half standing. "They've got you too close." She looked at the card briefly. "It's fine, it's not." Daniel insisted. "You don't need to be up there." The phrasing mattered. Don't need, not don't want. He framed the correction as generosity, as if moving her away were a favor. Before Brooke could respond, Daniel flagged down a staff member, a young woman with a tablet and a practiced smile. "Excuse me," he said, confident. "There's been a mistake." The staffer stopped attentive. "How can I help?" Daniel gestured toward Brooke's place setting. "My wife shouldn't be seated here. She'll be more comfortable further back." The staffer hesitated. It was brief, but Brooke noticed it immediately. The pause was not confusion. It was recognition colliding with instruction. Let me check," the staffer said, fingers hovering over the tablet. Daniel sighed theatrically. "It's really not a big deal." Brooke spoke calmly. "It's all right," she said. "We can move." The staffer looked relieved, grateful for the resolution. She nodded and adjusted the tablet. "Of course." Thank you. Daniel smiled, satisfied. See, he said to Brooke. Easy. Brooke followed him to the reassigned seat without resistance. She did not correct the assumption. She did not insist on protocol. She understood the value of allowing behavior to complete itself. Across the room, Lauren Miles noticed the interaction from the corner of her eye. She frowned, scrolling quickly through the internal seating chart. Brooke Baker's name flagged, annotated unmistakable, had been moved without authorization. Lauren exhaled slowly and made another note. The reassigned seat was perfectly adequate by most standards. The view of the stage was still clear. The table was still well appointed. Daniel leaned back, pleased with himself, and reached for his wine. There, he said, much better. Brooke folded her napkin carefully. She did not look at the stage. She looked at Daniel, not with anger, with assessment. The seating change had been unnecessary. That was the point. Daniel needed to assert dominance where he felt it slipping. Public correction reassured him. It also created a clean, documented deviation from protocol. A few tables away, Margaret Holloway observed the shift. She did not intervene. Her role was not to manage individual behavior. It was to oversee systems. And the system was now producing data. Thomas Reed returned from the corridor and took his seat, expression composed. He glanced toward the updated seating arrangement, then at his phone. Another notification appeared, routine procedural. Secondary incident logged. He tapped the screen once and locked it. Daniel leaned toward a colleague at the table. You'd be surprised how often this happens, he said lightly. They always assume. The colleague nodded awkwardly. Right. Brooke noticed the colleague's discomfort, the way his eyes darted toward the staff, then back to his plate. Discomfort was not the same as dissent, but it mattered. As the program resumed, the speaker on stage thanked sponsors again, voice warm, rehearsed. Names scrolled across the screen. Logos glowed briefly, then faded. Brooke watched the screen carefully. Daniel did not. He whispered another comment, this one softer, meant only for her. You should have told me, he said. I could have fixed this before we sat down. Brooke met his gaze. There's nothing to fix. He laughed quietly. You always say that. Yes, she thought. Because there rarely is. As the evening progressed, the seating incident rippled outward. Staff adjusted quietly. PR recalibrated messaging. The board chair made a note to discuss protocol adherence after the event. None of it was dramatic. None of it required confrontation. That was the strength of systems. They absorbed disruption without spectacle. Daniel mistook the absence of response for validation. He leaned back, relaxed, convinced he had restored balance. He did not see how his actions were being reinterpreted, not as leadership, but as liability. Brooke's phone vibrated once more. She did not check it. She already knew the nature of the update. The pattern was complete. The threshold had been crossed not by one act, but by repetition. She looked around the room, noting how attention had subtly shifted. Conversations near their table were shorter now. Glances lingered, then slid away. Daniel's presence no longer drew admiration. It drew assessment. He noticed it too eventually. People seem tense, he muttered. Probably just the program. Probably, Brooke agreed. The truth was simpler. Institutions did not panic. They recalibrated. And recalibration often felt to those unaccustomed to it like distance. As dessert was served, Daniel checked his phone, frowning. That's strange, he said. I was expecting a confirmation email. For what Brooke asked. Nothing, he said, quickly waving it off. Work stuff. Brooke nodded. She did not ask follow-up questions. Answers, when premature, disrupted timing. The speaker concluded. Applause filled the hall. Staff moved efficiently, clearing plates, resetting the room for the next segment. The machine continued its work. Daniel stood to stretch again, scanning the room. I'm going to say hi to a few people, he said. Try not to disappear this time. Brooke smiled faintly. I'll be right here. As he walked away, she watched his back not with resentment, but with clarity. The seating card had not been about comfort. It had been about control. And in attempting to assert it publicly, since Daniel had revealed exactly how he understood power. Brooke adjusted her chair slightly and faced forward. She was exactly where she needed to be. The room did not yet know it, but it would. The first institutional shift never announced itself. It arrived as a pause. Lauren Miles stood just beyond the service corridor, tablet balanced against her forearm. Eyes scanning a message she had read twice already. The language was neutral, no adjectives, no implied judgment. That was what made it serious. Incident logged, threshold met, proceed per agreement. Lauren exhaled through her nose and closed her eyes briefly. She had spent her career learning how to protect events from spiraling into chaos. Most problems could be smoothed over with timing redirection or a carefully worded apology. This was not one of those problems. She tapped out a response acknowledging receipt and forwarded the message to Margaret Holloway with a single line of context. No speculation, no commentary, just facts. Across the hall, Thomas Reed felt his phone vibrate again. He glanced down, eyebrows knitting together for a fraction of a second before he smoothed his expression. The bank's systems were designed to flag inconsistencies early, to create distance between money and emotion. He appreciated that about them. Emotion complicated outcomes. Compliance simplified them. He rose quietly from his seat and moved toward Margaret's table, careful not to draw attention. He leaned in and spoke low enough that only she could hear. "We've initiated a verification hold," he said. "No action yet, just alignment." Margaret nodded once. "Thank you," she replied. "Keep it contained." She did not ask questions. She did not need to. She trusted process the way Brooke Baker did, by letting it work. At Brooke's table, the shift manifested as a subtle tightening of the air. Conversations near her shortened. Laughter dulled. People glanced toward the stage more often than necessary, as if waiting for a cue they could not yet see. Daniel returned from his circuit of handshakes with a glass of wine, and an expression sharpened by irritation. "Something's off," he muttered, sliding back into his chair. "People are acting weird." Brooke looked at him calmly. "It's a long night," he scoffed. "It's not that. I just talked to Mark. He barely listened." Brooke folded her hands in her lap. Maybe he was distracted by what Daniel demanded. Nothing's changed. Brooke did not answer. She was thinking about the difference between change and recognition. Change often happened quietly. Recognition arrived later, sometimes too late to alter outcomes. Daniel checked his phone again. No new notifications. He frowned, tapping the screen as if the device might respond to insistence. "I was supposed to get a confirmation from finance," he said. "They said they'd circle back tonight." "Maybe they will," Brooke said evenly. He shot her a look. "You always say things like that." "Yes," she replied, "because it's usually true." Daniel leaned back unsatisfied. He took a long sip of wine, then gestured toward the stage as applause swelled again. "At least the program's going well," he said. "That's what matters." Brooke watched the speaker conclude and step away from the podium. She noticed how the applause lagged slightly before catching. A delay that might mean nothing, or everything. Her phone vibrated softly. She did not open the message immediately. She waited until the applause subsided, until the room settled into that brief, expectant quiet that followed a transition. Then she reached into her bag and glanced at the screen. Verification initiated. Disbursement paused pending board acknowledgement. The words were clinical. They were also decisive. Brooke's thumb hovered over the screen for a moment. She considered the implications not for herself, but for the beneficiaries. For the youth programs that depended on continuity. For the staff who had worked months to make the night succeed. She typed a brief reply. "Confirm continuity protections in place. No disruption to programming." She slipped the phone back into her bag and lifted her gaze to the stage, her expression unchanged. Daniel noticed the movement. "Everything okay?" he asked, a note of suspicion creeping in. "Yes," Brooke said. "Everything is proceeding." He narrowed his eyes. "You sure?" She met his gaze, I'm sure. The program shifted into a recognition segment. Donors were thanked in ascending tiers, names displayed on the screen. Applause followed, each grouping polite and measured. Daniel leaned forward, scanning the screen. He smiled when he recognized a firm he admired. He nudged Brooke lightly. See, that's how you do it. Brooke watched the order carefully. She noticed the spacing between acknowledgments, the way the highest tier was reserved for later. She noticed how the MC paused slightly longer before transitioning, as if waiting for a signal. Vanessa Cole stood near the stage phone, pressed to her ear, nodding as she listened. She ended the call and typed quickly, her expression focused. The machine was recalibrating. Daniel's confidence began to fray at the edges. He leaned closer to Brooke, voice lowered. "Did you talk to anyone tonight?" he asked. She turned toward him. "About what?" "About anything," he said vaguely. "You've been quiet." "I always am," Brooke replied. "That's not an answer," Daniel snapped, then caught himself glancing around. He forced a laugh. "I just mean you disappear sometimes." Brooke studied him for a moment. She saw the irritation, the uncertainty creeping in. She recognized the pattern. When Daniel sensed loss of control, he sought someone to blame. "I'm here," she said simply. He looked away, unsatisfied. At the board table, Margaret Holloway reviewed a message from Lauren Miles, then another from Thomas Reed. She set her phone down and folded her hands, her expression composed. The next segment of the program was about to begin. Brooke felt the weight of inevitability settle, not as tension, but as alignment. The system had done what it was designed to do. It had absorbed behavior-evaluated impact and responded without spectacle. Daniel shifted in his seat, uneasy now. "I don't like this," he muttered. Brooke turned to him. "What don't you like?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know. The vibe." She nodded. "Rooms change." He laughed nervously. "You always make it sound so ominous." "It isn't," Brooke said. "It's just accurate." As the lights dimmed again and attention returned to the stage, Daniel leaned back, forcing himself to relax. He told himself he was overthinking, that nothing serious could happen in a room full of donors and polite applause. Brooke watched the stage with calm focus. The first institutional shift had already occurred. It did not need his awareness to continue. Public cruelty, Brooke Baker knew, rarely believed it was being recorded. It relied on the assumption of privacy within crowds, the mistaken idea that laughter diluted responsibility, that volume disguised intent. Daniel Baker had always thrived in that assumption. The Gala's scale emboldened him. The presence of donor staff and polished decor gave his words a sheen of harmlessness he mistook for immunity. As the MC stepped aside and the room eased into another mingling interval, Daniel rose again, restless. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his tie, and scanned the hall for familiar faces. Brooke remained seated, her posture composed, her attention steady. "You coming?" he asked, already halfway turned. "In a moment," she said. He shrugged and moved off, buoyed by motion. Brooke watched him go, noting the pattern, how he grew louder as he moved farther from her, how the comments sharpened when he sensed an audience willing to receive them. Near the bar, Daniel joined a cluster of guests who had already been drinking. The laughter there was looser, less restrained by politeness. He slipped easily into their rhythm. "Long night," someone said. Daniel laughed. "Tell me about it. You try dragging someone through one of these when they don't even want to be here." The phrasing landed again, familiar now. A few people chuckled. Someone raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Brooke saw the phones before Daniel did. Not raised overtly, not pointed directly, just angled casually, as if capturing ambiance. The difference was subtle but important. These were not staged recordings. They were incidental, authentic. Vanessa Cole noticed it too. She stood near the edge of the group, pretending to check messages while listening closely. The pattern was unmistakable. Repetition, tone, context. If this were to surface publicly, it would not read as a single misstep. It would read as character. She typed quickly into her phone, flagging the time. She did not interrupt. Interruptions created defensiveness. Documentation created options. Daniel continued unaware. Honestly, he said, swirling his glass, some people think just showing up is enough. A guest laughed too loudly. Another shifted uncomfortably. Someone else glanced toward Brooke, then back to Daniel, curiosity sharpening. Brooke remained at the table watching from a distance. She did not move to intervene. Intervention would shift focus. She had learned that allowing behavior to complete itself was often the most revealing response. She reached into her bag and removed her notebook again. She wrote nothing yet. She waited. Timing mattered. At another table, a woman leaned toward her companion and whispered. The companion shook his head slowly. Across the aisle, a man murmured into his phone, stepping away to avoid being overheard. The room was no longer neutral. It was attentive. Daniel felt it then, a subtle resistance, a change in the way laughter landed. He pushed harder, mistaking tension for challenge. I mean, he said, lowering his voice as if confiding, you'd think if someone cared, they'd at least try to look the part. The words hung in the air longer than he expected. A guest near him cleared her throat. That's a bit harsh, she said quietly. Daniel blinked, surprised. I'm kidding, he replied quickly, laughing again. You know how it is. The laughter this time was thinner. Brooke wrote a single line in her notebook, comment reframed as joke after objection. Witnesses present. She closed the notebook and returned it to her bag. The speaker lights flickered briefly on stage, signaling the next segment would begin soon. Staff moved through the room with quiet urgency, encouraging guests back to their seats. The machine was ready to resume its rhythm. Daniel returned to the table, irritation now evident. People are so sensitive, he muttered, dropping into his chair. You can't say anything anymore. Brooke looked at him calmly. You can, she said. People hear it. He scoffed. You always twist things. She did not respond. She did not need to. As the lights dimmed, Daniel leaned forward, scanning the room again. His confidence wavered. He sensed the shift now, not in any single glance, but in the accumulation of them. Conversations ended when he approached. Smiles were polite, brief. He checked his phone again. Still nothing. On stage, the MC returned, voice warm, but measured. Before we continue, she said, we'd like to acknowledge the individuals and organizations whose commitment makes tonight possible. The screen behind her glowed, preparing to cycle. Daniel straightened, anticipation returning. This was his world recognition applause alignment. He glanced at Brooke, then at the screen, then back to the room. Brooke felt the weight of the moment without tension. She did not expect revelation yet. She expected confirmation. As names began to appear, Daniel scanned eagerly. Logos he admired flashed briefly, then faded. Applause followed each one, polite and practiced. Brooke watched the timing, the pauses, the way the MC's eyes flicked briefly off stage between segments awaiting cues. Vanessa Cole stood near the wing's phone, pressed to her ear again. Lauren Miles joined her, tablet in hand. They exchanged a look professional, contained. The list paused, a beat longer than necessary. Daniel frowned. What's taking so long? Brooke did not answer. The MC cleared her throat lightly and continued adjusting the order slightly. The audience clapped again, unaware of the recalibration taking place behind the scenes. Daniel's phone buzzed at last. He glanced down, then frowned deeper. That's weird, he muttered. Brooke watched his face carefully. Confusion. Not yet fear. The message had not told him enough to alarm him, just enough to unsettle. What, she asked quietly. Nothing, he said quickly, locking the screen. Just work. She nodded. She did not press. The room settled back into its rhythm, but the undercurrent remained. Public cruelty had done its work. It had created witnesses. It had generated records. It had invited institutional attention. Daniel leaned toward Brooke, voice low. You could have helped me tonight, he said. Instead of sitting there like that, Brooke met his gaze steadily. I did help. He laughed bitterly. By doing nothing, she held his eyes, by letting the truth be visible. He shook his head, dismissive. You're impossible. She turned back toward the stage. Impossibility was a matter of perspective. From Brooke's vantage point, everything unfolding was predictable. Systems did not reward humiliation. They documented it. And documentation, once complete, did not argue. As the program moved forward, Daniel's earlier laughter echoed in Brooke's mind, not as sound, but as sequence. Word followed by reaction. Reaction followed by record. Record followed by consequence. The slow burn was nearly complete. By the time the evidence began to assemble, it no longer needed interpretation. Michael Grant sat at his desk, screens arranged with deliberate symmetry, watching the live feed on mute. He preferred silence when reviewing facts. Sound distracted. The language of behavior was visible without it. On one screen, the event's internal reporting portal displayed a chronological list of entries. Each was brief. Each was timestamped. No adjectives, no conclusions, just actions. Public remark directed at spouse. Witnesses present. Seating protocol overridden by non-authorized party. Repeated comments framed as humor after objection. Michael cross-referenced each entry with the venue's camera feeds. He noted angles, distances, proximity to staff microphones. He did not need perfect audio. The context was sufficient. Public event. No expectation of privacy. Documentation lawful. He opened a new folder labeled Gala Compliance Review and began organizing. Meanwhile, Lauren Miles moved through the service corridor with purpose. She had already secured copies of the venue's recordings, standard practice retained for liability review. She flagged the relevant time windows and forwarded them to Michael with a single line available footage. No edits. She did not add commentary. She did not need to. Vanessa Cole contributed next. Her team had been monitoring social media tags throughout the evening, scanning for unauthorized live streams or problematic posts. They found several short clips, nothing viral, nothing dramatic. Just ambient recordings. Conversations caught at the edges. Laughter, tone. Vanessa forwarded the links with a note. Contextual risk. Multiple independent sources. Michael acknowledged receipt and saved them, without watching yet. He preferred to build the timeline first, then review. Across the hall, Brooke Baker sat quietly, the program continuing around her. She sensed the shift, not emotionally, but structurally. Staff moved with increased precision. Conversations shortened. The room felt contained, as if everyone were waiting for something they could not name. Daniel shifted in his seat, restless. He leaned toward Brooke, voice tight. People are looking at us. She glanced around briefly. People always look. Not like this, he said. You've been acting strange all night. Brooke met his gaze calmly. I've been consistent. He scoffed. That's your favorite word. Yes, she said, because it matters. On stage, the MC transitioned into a segment highlighting future initiatives. Slides advanced smoothly. Applause followed. The machine continued its work, absorbing the evening's friction without visible disruption. Behind the scenes, Michael began reviewing the footage. He watched the first clip, Daniel laughing, gesturing toward Brooke's dress. He noted the volume, the proximity of others, the presence of recording devices. He did not react. He moved to the next. In another clip, Daniel leaned toward a group voice, lower but still audible. The words were less clear, but the reactions were visible. Awkward smiles, shifting posture, a woman glancing away. Michael paused the video and made a note. Pattern established. Public setting. Repetition. He moved on. The seating incident footage was less dramatic but more consequential. Daniel flagging down staff, the staffer hesitating. Brooke stepping in to allow the change. The deviation from protocol was clear. Michael cross-referenced the seating chart Lauren had provided. Brooke Baker's name was marked with a sponsor liaison flag. The override was unauthorized. He added another note. Procedural deviation. Documented. By the time he finished reviewing, the timeline was complete. He compiled the materials into a single file: video clips, screenshots, incident logs, and relevant contract excerpts. He drafted a neutral summary, careful with language. No accusations, no interpretations, just alignment between behavior and agreement. He sent the file to Margaret Holloway with a brief message. For board acknowledgement per sponsorship terms. No immediate action required beyond review. Margaret received the file and read it carefully. She did not skim. She had chaired enough boards to know that diligence protected institutions from future harm. She noted the clarity, the restraint, the absence of theatrics. She appreciated that. She forwarded the file to 2 other board members with a note. Please review before end of evening. Procedural alignment needed. Back in the hall, Daniel's phone buzzed again. He glanced down and frowned. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Brooke looked at him. What doesn't? He hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing. Just delays. She nodded. Delays clarify things. He laughed bitterly. You always talk like this is a lecture. She considered that. It's more like an audit. He rolled his eyes and turned back toward the stage. As the program approached its final segments, the room's energy shifted from celebration to conclusion. Guests checked watches. Staff prepared closing remarks. The sponsor screen stood ready for one last cycle. Vanessa Cole received a message from Lauren Miles' board reviewing now. Hold acknowledgements until signal. Vanessa replied with a single word, understood. Daniel leaned toward Brooke again, voice low and sharp. Did you complain about me? He demanded. Brooke met his gaze evenly. No. Then why does it feel like everyone's avoiding me? He pressed. She paused before answering, because behavior travels faster than intention. He stared at her, incredulous. You think this is about me? She did not answer immediately. She looked at the stage, then back at him. I think this is about what's been recorded. His expression hardened. You're unbelievable. She did not respond. The truth did not require defense. At the board table, Margaret Holloway closed the file and set her tablet down. She exchanged a glance with Thomas Reed, who nodded once. Proceed, Margaret said quietly. Thomas typed a brief instruction into his phone. Compliance systems responded immediately. In the audience, Daniel felt his phone vibrate with a new alert. He glanced down, eyes scanning confusion, deepening. That can't be right, he muttered. Brooke watched him carefully, not with satisfaction, with confirmation. The evidence had done its work. It had assembled itself through repetition, through witnesses, through documentation. No one had needed to raise a voice. No one had needed to accuse. The system had simply aligned. As the MC returned to the podium for closing remarks, Brooke sat forward, slightly attentive. She knew the visible shift was approaching, not as spectacle, but as acknowledgement. Daniel leaned back, uneasy now. The earlier laughter drained from his posture. He looked around the room, searching for affirmation that did not come. Brooke folded her hands in her lap and faced forward. The slow burn was no longer about possibility. It was about procedure. The podium had always been the safest place in the room. It was elevated, lit, and controlled. Words spoken there were prepared, approved, rehearsed. Applause followed on cue. Daniel Baker had believed until this night that whatever happened elsewhere could be corrected once attention returned to the stage. As the MC stepped forward for the final segment, Daniel straightened instinctively. This was the moment that mattered. Recognition, closure, the public signal that everything had gone as planned. Brooke Baker felt the same shift, but differently. She understood that podiums did not create authority. They displayed it, and displays depended entirely on what institutions were willing to stand behind. The MC smiled warmly, hands resting on the lectern. Before we conclude tonight, she said, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the support that made this evening possible. Applause rose polite and expectant. Daniel leaned forward, eyes on the screen behind her. He glanced sideways at Brooke, as if daring her to react. Here we go, he whispered. Brooke did not look at him. She watched the MC's eyes instead, the slight flick toward the wings, the micro-pause before continuing. Signals Daniel had never learned to read. The sponsor screen brightened. Names began to cycle. Mid-tier donors appeared first, Applause followed, measured. Daniel nodded along, satisfied. This was familiar. This was safe. Then the screen dimmed briefly. A pause, longer than before. The MC cleared her throat lightly. "We're grateful for the commitment of our partners," she continued, adjusting her phrasing. "Their support ensures the continuity of these programs beyond tonight." Daniel frowned. "Why are they dragging this out?" he muttered. Brooke felt the room hold its breath. At the board table, Margaret Holloway sat perfectly still, hands folded. Thomas Reed stood just behind her, shoulder posture formal. Lauren Miles hovered near the side of the stage tablet, pressed to her chest. Vanessa Cole watched the audience, her expression carefully neutral. The screen refreshed. Instead of logos, a single line of text appeared, simple, unadorned. Principal sponsorship acknowledgement, pending board confirmation. A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel's smile faltered. "What does that mean?" he whispered sharply. Brooke remained still. The MC continued smoothly, as if nothing were amiss. "In the interest of transparency," she said, voice steady, "we'll be issuing a formal acknowledgement once our board completes a routine procedural review." The words were neutral. They carried no accusation, but they landed with unmistakable weight. Daniel's phone vibrated violently against the table. He snatched it up, scanning the message. His face drained of color. "Brooke," he hissed, "what did you do?" She turned to him calmly. "Nothing." "That's a lie," he snapped, lowering his voice. "This doesn't just happen." She held his gaze. "It happens when agreements are reviewed." His laugh was short and sharp. "You think you're smarter than everyone in this room?" She considered that. "I think systems are." He pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. Chairs scraped nearby. A few heads turned. Margaret Holloway raised her hand slightly, not toward Daniel, but toward Lauren. Lauren nodded once and stepped forward, positioning herself just within Daniel's line of sight. "Mr. Baker," Lauren said quietly, professionally, "please remain seated." Daniel stared at her. "Excuse me, this is not the appropriate moment," she continued evenly. He looked around, incredulous. "Do you know who I am?" Lauren met his gaze without blinking. "Yes. And you're telling me to sit down? I'm asking you to follow protocol," she replied. Brooke watched the exchange with composed attention. She noted the phrasing. Asking. Protocol. Words chosen carefully. Daniel turned toward Margaret. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "There's been some mistake." Margaret rose slowly from her chair. The movement was unhurried, but it commanded attention instantly. Conversations stilled. "There has been no mistake," she said calmly. "There has been a review." Daniel laughed brittle. A review of what? Margaret's eyes shifted briefly to Brooke, then back to Daniel. "Of conduct," she said, "and compliance." The word compliance cut through the room. Daniel's gaze snapped to Brooke. "You set me up," he accused. Brooke stood slowly, smoothing her dress, not in defiance, but in readiness. She did not raise her voice. "No," she said, "I documented." Gasps rippled through the nearest tables. Margaret gestured subtly toward Thomas Reed. Thomas stepped forward, holding a tablet angled toward Daniel. "Mr. Baker," Thomas said, voice. "Even the event's primary disbursement is currently under procedural hold, pending board acknowledgement of documented incidents." Daniel stared at the screen, eyes darting. "This is insane," he said. "You can't just—" "We can," Margaret interrupted gently. "And we have." Daniel's breath quickened. "This is my wife," he said, gesturing wildly at Brooke. "You're going to take her side." Margaret's expression did not change. "This is not about sides," she said. "It's about agreements." Brooke met Daniel's gaze one last time. There was no triumph there, only clarity. "I didn't sponsor this event to be seen," she said quietly. "I sponsored it to work." Silence followed. The MC stood frozen at the podium, awaiting instruction. Lauren nodded to her subtly. The MC took a breath and continued with closing remarks, steering attention gently back toward the program. Margaret turned to Daniel. "We'll be in touch through appropriate channels," she said. "For now, I suggest you step outside." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He looked around the room at the faces no longer smiling at the phones, now openly recording at the staff, standing still but alert. He realized too late that the podium was no longer his refuge. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, his shoulders rigid. Brooke remained standing for a moment longer. She nodded once to Margaret, then to Lauren. No smiles were exchanged, none were needed. She sat back down as the applause resumed, muted, uncertain but respectful. The podium reclaimed its role. The program concluded. But the room would remember what had happened there, not as drama but as procedure. The room did not explode after Daniel left. That more than anything unsettled the people who had been watching. There was no shouting, no scramble, no rush of security. The gala did what institutions were designed to do when disruption threatened their center. It absorbed the moment and moved forward. Applause returned measured and polite. Not celebratory, not awkward. Just sufficient to signal that the program was resuming as intended. Brooke Baker sat quietly as the MC finished the closing remarks. She did not scan the room for reactions. She did not search for sympathy. She focused on the words being spoken, on the promise of continuity of programs funded, of communities served. That promise mattered more than the spectacle that had almost overtaken it. When the final applause faded and guests began to rise, the energy shifted again. Conversations restarted, but at a different pitch. Quieter, more deliberate. People spoke in pairs rather than groups. Phones were checked openly now, messages sent without pretense. Brooke remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, allowing the room to settle around her. Lauren Miles approached first. She stopped just short of the table posture, respectful hands folded loosely at her waist. "Miss Baker," she said quietly. Brooke looked up. "Yes. Thank you for your patience tonight," Lauren continued, "and for your clarity." Brooke inclined her head slightly. "Thank you for protecting the work." Lauren nodded. "We'll ensure continuity as requested. The beneficiaries won't be affected." "I appreciate that," Brooke said. There was no more to say. Lauren stepped away already, fielding another inquiry from staff. Margaret Holloway approached next, her expression composed but thoughtful. She extended her hand. "Miss Baker," she said, "on behalf of the board, thank you." Brooke stood and shook her hand. "For the programs," she replied. "Not for me." Margaret studied her for a moment. "You understand how rare that distinction is?" Brooke offered a small, neutral smile. "It shouldn't be." Margaret nodded. "We'll be formalizing our acknowledgement once the procedural review is completed. Your counsel will be contacted." "Of course," Brooke said. Margaret hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry for what you experienced." Brooke met her eyes calmly. "I'm not." Margaret blinked, surprised. "It clarified things," Brooke continued gently, "for everyone." Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "it did." As Margaret moved on, Thomas Reed stepped forward, tablet tucked under his arm. "The hold will remain in place until the board signs off," he said quietly. "Based on what's been documented, that shouldn't take long." "Thank you," Brooke replied. "Please ensure the funds earmarked for immediate programming are released under the continuity clause." "They already are," Thomas said. That instruction was clear. Brooke nodded. "Good." She gathered her bag and slipped the notebook inside, then rose from her seat. Around her, guests began to leave in clusters. Some glanced at her with curiosity. Others avoided eye contact entirely. A few offered quiet nods, acknowledgement, without intrusion. As Brooke made her way toward the exit, Vanessa Cole fell into step beside her. "If you'd like," Vanessa said softly, "we can manage press inquiries proactively. Frame this as a procedural matter." Brooke considered that. "No," she said. "Please don't." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "Yes," Brooke replied. "Let the record speak for itself." Vanessa studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." At the entrance, the sponsor wall still glowed unchanged. Brooke paused briefly, not to look at the names, but to take in the structure of the space one last time. The machine was winding down now, its work largely complete. Outside, the night air was cool and steady. Valets moved efficiently, retrieving cars. Guests clustered near the curb, voices low, conversations fragmented. Brooke stepped onto the sidewalk and drew a slow breath. Not in relief, in completion. Her phone vibrated. A message from Michael Grant appeared on the screen. Board acknowledgement expected within 48 hours. Documentation complete. "Are you safe?" Brooke typed a reply. "Yes, thank you. Please proceed as discussed." She slipped the phone back into her bag and waited as her car pulled up. As she opened the door, she noticed a familiar figure standing across the street. Daniel. He was alone. Jacket unbuttoned, phone pressed to his ear. His posture was rigid, his movements sharp. He paced in short bursts, frustration evident even from a distance. Brooke watched him for a moment. She did not approach. She did not signal. She did not feel the urge to say anything at all. This was no longer a conversation. It was a sequence already in motion. She slid into the back seat and closed the door. The car pulled away smoothly, merging into traffic without drama. Inside, Brooke sat quietly watching the city lights pass. Her reflection in the window looked unchanged, calm, contained, ordinary. That was what people often misunderstood about power. They expected it to look different afterwards. Louder, sharper, more triumphant. But real power did not alter the face. It altered the structure around it. By the time Brooke arrived home, emails were already being drafted. Notices prepared, timelines confirmed. None of it required her immediate attention. The system would carry it forward now. She placed her bag on the table and removed the notebook, setting it beside her keys. She did not open it. She did not need to add anything else. Everything that mattered had already been written. Legal justice rarely announced itself with the drama. It arrived instead through envelopes, timestamps, and language that left no room for interpretation. By the next morning, the Gala already felt distant, its polished surfaces replaced by the clean severity of procedure. Brooke Baker woke early, as she always did, and made coffee without turning on the news. She did not need commentary. She needed clarity. Her phone lay face down on the counter. It would vibrate when necessary. At precisely 8:17 a.m. It did. Michael Grant's name appeared on the screen, followed by a single line of preview text, formal notice issued. Brooke answered on the second ring. "It's done." Michael set his voice even. "Notice of conduct breach has been delivered to the board and copied to counsel for all relevant parties." Language, Brooke asked. "Neutral, procedural. It cites documented incidents, references the sponsorship agreement, and invokes the review and pause provisions. No accusations. No commentary," Good Brooke said. "The bank has confirmed the hold," Michael continued. "Disbursement for long-term funding is paused pending board acknowledgement. Continuity funds are released as instructed. No interruption to programming." Brooke closed her eyes briefly, not in relief, but in alignment. "Thank you. There's more," Michael added, "because Mr. Baker identified himself publicly as your spouse in connection with the event. The institution's legal counsel has flagged a reputational exposure issue." Brooke said nothing. She listened. "They've notified his employer," Michael continued, "not as a complaint, as disclosure. The documentation includes video incident logs and the seating deviation. Everything is timestamped." "How did they respond?" Brooke asked. Michael paused. "They acknowledged receipt and initiated an internal review." Brooke exhaled slowly. As expected, Michael hesitated. "I want to be clear," he said. "This isn't retaliation. It's consequence. The difference matters." "I know," Brooke replied. "That's why I didn't intervene." After the call ended, Brooke stood at the counter for a moment longer, then poured the coffee she had already prepared. She drank it slowly, savoring the quiet. Across town, Daniel Baker sat at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop. The email from his employer had arrived less than an hour earlier. The subject line was neutral, almost kind. "Request for meeting internal review." Daniel read it again, as if repetition might change its meaning. His phone buzzed with messages he ignored. He told himself this was temporary, a misunderstanding, something that could be smoothed over with the right explanation. He drafted a response, then deleted it. Drafted another, deleted that too. Explanations required leverage. He was no longer sure he had any. By mid-morning, Brooke received a formal packet via secure email. Michael forwarded it with a brief note. "For your records, no action required at this time." She opened it and reviewed the contents carefully. The notice was precise. It listed dates, times, locations. It referenced clauses by number, not by interpretation. It included attachments, screenshots, links, summaries. Everything she had observed was now externalized, objective, no longer hers alone to carry. She saved the file and closed her laptop. The legal process moved forward without her presence. That was the point. The board convened in the afternoon. Brooke was not invited. She did not request to attend. Her agreement did not require her participation beyond documentation. Margaret Holloway chaired the meeting with her usual composure. She presented the facts without embellishment. The board members asked questions not about Brooke's reaction, but about institutional risk, about precedent, about obligations. Thomas Reed answered where necessary. Lauren Miles provided operational context. Vanessa Cole outlined communication safeguards. When the vote was taken, it was unanimous. The board acknowledged the breach. The sponsorship agreement's review clause was formally invoked. Funding would continue under revised oversight. Public acknowledgement would be adjusted to reflect procedural alignment. No one raised their voice. No one expressed outrage. That, more than anything, underscored the gravity of the decision. Later that afternoon, Daniel received another email. This one was shorter. "Your role in upcoming external-facing events is suspended pending review. Please coordinate with HR." He stared at the screen, disbelief giving way to anger. He called Brooke. The phone rang once, twice. She did not answer. He left a voicemail, his voice tight. "You can't do this," he said. "You've blown this completely out of proportion. Call me." Brooke listened to the message later, standing in her living room, phone in hand. She did not replay it. She did not respond. The words "you can't do this" echoed in her mind, not as accusation, but as irony. She had not done anything. She had documented. The days that followed unfolded with quiet efficiency. Formal letters arrived. One from the board confirming acknowledgement. One from the bank outlining revised disbursement timelines. One from Michael summarizing next steps should any further inquiries arise. Brooke read each, carefully filed them, and moved on. Daniel's calls became less frequent. His messages shifted in tone from anger to disbelief, from disbelief to bargaining. He suggested counseling, mediation, starting fresh. Brooke did not engage. She met with Michael once more, this time in person. They sat across from each other in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and paper. "There's one more thing," Michael said, sliding a document across the table. "Given the pattern of behavior documented not just at the gala, but in previous communications, you have grounds to initiate separation proceedings if you choose." Brooke glanced at the document but did not open it. "I know." Michael waited. "I won't be doing it here," Brooke continued. "Not in this room. Not as part of this process." "Of course," he said. "This was never about ending a marriage," she added quietly. "It was about ending a pattern." Michael nodded. Understood. That evening, Brooke attended a small meeting with a nonprofit director whose program she had supported for years. They sat across from each other at a modest table, reviewing budgets and timelines. "Everything okay?" the director asked, noticing Brooke's distraction. "Yes," Brooke replied. "Everything's moving as it should." And it was. Justice, Brooke reflected later, was rarely satisfying in the way stories promised. It did not offer release or vindication. It offered alignment. Actions met consequences. Systems responded as designed. No one needed to be punished publicly. No one needed to be shamed. The record had spoken, and for the first time in a long while, Brooke felt the weight she had been carrying settle, not because it disappeared, but because it was finally shared. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They unfolded the way systems preferred, incrementally, with documentation, each step justified by the one before it. Daniel Baker experienced the first wave as confusion. His employer's internal review moved quickly but quietly. There were no accusations in the initial meetings, only questions. Questions framed around behavior optics and risk. Questions accompanied by transcripts and timestamps. Questions he could not talk his way out of. He sat across from 2 HR representatives and a legal advisor in a glass-walled conference room, the city visible beyond them. The transparency felt intentional. "We want to understand your conduct at the gala," one of the HR managers said calmly, specifically remarks made in public spaces on camera. Daniel laughed once sharply. "This is about a joke." The legal advisor slid a document across the table. "This is about a pattern," she said. Daniel scanned the page. His own words stared back at him, stripped of tone, recorded in black and white. The context was there too, the setting, the witnesses, the affiliation with a sponsored event connected to his professional network. "This is my private life," he argued. "My marriage." The advisor did not look up. It became a public matter when it was documented in a professional context. Daniel's confidence eroded in real time. He tried deflection, minimization. He framed Brooke as overly sensitive, as calculating, as vindictive. None of it landed. The documentation did not respond to narrative. It responded to alignment. By the end of the meeting, Daniel was informed politely, formally, that he would be placed on administrative leave, pending completion of the review. His access to external-facing responsibilities was suspended. His calendar cleared. He walked out of the building, stunned, the familiar sense of momentum gone. Brooke learned of this, not through Daniel, but through Michael Grant, who forwarded a brief update late that afternoon. "Employer action initiated. Administrative leave confirmed. No further involvement required from you." She read the message once and set her phone aside. Her focus was elsewhere. The following week, Brooke met with the nonprofit's leadership team to finalize revised oversight protocols. The board wanted reassurance not because they doubted her, but because systems required continuity to be visible. They met in a modest conference room, no press, no ceremony. Brooke reviewed the updated structure, asked questions about reporting cadence, and ensured funding milestones aligned with program needs rather than publicity cycles. "This won't change our work," one director asked carefully. "No," Brooke said. "It will protect it." And it did. The funding resumed under the revised agreement. Programs continued uninterrupted. Staff salaries cleared on time. The gala became in public memory a successful evening with a brief procedural pause. Nothing more. That distinction mattered to Brooke. She did not want the event remembered for Daniel's behavior. She wanted it remembered for the work it supported. Daniel, meanwhile, experienced the second wave as isolation. Invitations stopped arriving. Messages went unanswered. People he had once considered allies grew distant, careful. Not cruel, just unavailable. He called Brooke again. This time she answered. "Please don't hang up," he said immediately, voice strained. "We need to talk." She listened without interrupting. "I didn't mean any of it like that," he continued. "You know me. You know how I joke." "I know how you speak," Brooke replied calmly. "That's not fair," he snapped. "You let them do this to me." She paused before responding. "I didn't let anything happen," she said. "I didn't stop it." There was a difference. "You're punishing me," he insisted. "No," Brooke said. "I'm stepping away." He fell silent. "I'm not doing this here," she continued, "or like this. We'll communicate through counsel. You can't just leave," he said, desperation creeping in. "We're married." "Yes," she replied. "We are." "And you're okay with this?" he asked. "With ruining me?" She closed her eyes briefly, not in guilt, but in clarity. "I'm okay with not protecting behavior that harms others," she said, "including me." After the call ended, Brooke sat quietly for a long moment. She did not feel triumph. She felt resolution. The third wave arrived as formality. Michael Grant prepared the separation documents with the same care he applied to everything else. Language was neutral. Grounds were factual. There were no accusations, no emotional appeals. Brooke reviewed the draft once, then twice. She made one change, removing a paragraph that referenced the Gala specifically. "This doesn't need to be cited," she said. Michael nodded, understood. She signed the documents and returned them without ceremony. Daniel received the notice 2 days later. He did not respond immediately. When he did, it was through his own attorney. The process moved forward quietly. No statements were issued. No interviews given. Brooke declined all requests for comment that came indirectly through acquaintances. "Let it be boring," she told Michael. "Boring is safe." And it was. As weeks passed, Daniel's name faded from the conversations that once animated him. His administrative leave extended. His internal review concluded with recommendations that limited his role moving forward. There was no public firing, no headline, just a recalibration of trust. Brooke returned to her routines. She attended site visits without cameras. She reviewed quarterly reports. She met with directors who spoke passionately about outcomes rather than optics. One afternoon, she stood in the back of a community center, watching a group of students rehearse a performance funded by the program. Their laughter was unguarded, unrecorded. This was why she had sponsored the event. Not to be acknowledged, not to be praised, to make rooms like this possible. As she left, one of the instructors thanked her. "We wouldn't be here without you," she said. Brooke smiled gently. "You would," she replied, "just differently." The woman laughed, not understanding fully. Brooke did not explain. Explanation was no longer her role. By the time the legal separation was finalized, the Gala was a memory. Daniel's behavior existed only in records referenced when necessary, then set aside. Brooke did not look back. She had not won anything. She had simply refused to lose herself to silence. And in doing so, she had demonstrated a truth few people wanted to admit. Justice did not require humiliation. Accountability did not require rage. And dignity once claimed did not need to be defended again. The ending did not arrive as a moment. It arrived as a direction. Months after the Gala, Brooke Baker stood in a small conference room overlooking a park she had helped restore, not with her name, not with a plaque, but with funding that arrived on time and without conditions that distorted purpose. The windows were open. Children's voices drifted in from outside, unstructured and real. She listened as a program director reviewed outcomes from the last quarter. Attendance up, retention steady, community partnerships growing. The numbers mattered, but not as much as the tone, focused, grounded, unafraid. Brooke asked questions, precise ones, about sustainability, about staffing, about what would happen if funding paused unexpectedly. She made notes in the same careful hand she had used for years. When the meeting ended, she packed her notebook and stood. There was no applause, no acknowledgement beyond a few nods of mutual respect. This was how work continued when it was no longer overshadowed by performance. Outside, she walked slowly along the park path, hands in her coat pockets. The city moved around her joggers, passing a cyclist, ringing a bell, a parent calling a child's name. Ordinary life, undisturbed. She thought briefly of the Gala, of the lights and laughter, of the moment Daniel's words had echoed too far to be taken back, not with bitterness, not with satisfaction, with distance. Daniel existed now on the periphery of her life, reduced to paperwork, and the occasional formal exchange through attorneys. His name appeared only when necessary, always in contexts, stripped of drama. She had learned something important through the separation, not about him, but about herself. Silence, she realized, was only dangerous when it was imposed. When it was chosen, it became clarity. The legal proceedings concluded without incident. Assets were divided cleanly, agreements honored. There were no appeals, no delays designed to exhaust. Daniel did not contest the terms. Perhaps he understood finally that arguing with documentation was futile. On the day the final papers were signed, Brooke did not mark the occasion. She went to work as usual, reviewed a budget, approved a grant extension, answered emails that began with "Thank you for your time," and ended with, "We appreciate your trust." In the afternoon, Michael Grant called. "It's complete," he said. "Thank you," Brooke replied. "There's one more thing," Michael added. "The board wants to invite you to speak at the annual review." Brooke paused. "About what governance?" he said. "Transparency, accountability." She considered it. "I don't need to speak," she said. "They can read the record." Michael smiled on the other end of the line. "I thought you might say that." After the call, Brooke closed her laptop and sat back in her chair. She'd looked around the room at the unadorned walls, the stack of files, the plant by the window that needed watering. Her life was quieter now. Not smaller, quieter. The absence of Daniel's voice, once so eager to fill space, created room for other sounds. For thought, for intention. She did not replace him with noise. That evening, Brooke attended a small dinner hosted by a partner organization. No photographers, no stage. Just a long table shared food and conversation that lingered without agenda. At one point, a woman across from her asked, "How do you stay so calm when things get complicated?" Brooke considered the question. "I don't," she said. "I stay prepared." The woman nodded, understanding more than she said. Later, walking home under the streetlights, Brooke passed a storefront window and caught her reflection. She looked the same as she always had. The same posture, the same steady gaze. People often expected visible change after endings, new clothes, new habits, some external sign of transformation. But Brooke had never believed in visible change as proof of growth. Growth, she knew, showed up in boundaries, in what you no longer explained, in what you no longer tolerated. She reached her apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The space felt settled, intentional. Books where she left them, papers neatly stacked, a life arranged without apology. On the kitchen counter lay her notebook, the same one she had carried to the gala. She opened it for the first time in weeks. The last entry was dated that night. The handwriting precise. Repeated public mockery. Multiple witnesses. Recorded. She looked at the line for a long moment, then turned the page. She wrote one final sentence. No further notes required. She closed the notebook and placed it back on the shelf. Brooke Baker did not leave the marriage with spectacle. She did not leave with revenge. She left with her values intact, her work uninterrupted, and her name untethered from someone else's performance. The city would remember the gala as a success. The programs would continue. The records would remain filed and complete. And Daniel Baker would remember that night for the rest of his life, not because he was humiliated, but because he was revealed. Brooke did not need to remember it at all. She turned off the lights and went to bed knowing that tomorrow would look much like today. Structured, purposeful, quiet. And that was exactly the life she had chosen. Some stories end with noise. This one ends with understanding. What happened to Brooke Baker was never really about a dress or a gala or even a marriage. It was about how power is misunderstood and how dignity is often mistaken for weakness. Brooke did not win because she was louder, sharper, or crueler in return. She didn't win at all, not in the way people usually mean it. She simply refused to abandon herself in order to make someone else comfortable. There's a quiet lesson here that many of us learn too late. Silence is not the absence of strength. It is often the discipline of it. Brooke watched. She listened. She documented. While others believed power lived in public performance, she understood that real power lived in systems and records and consistency. She trusted truth to surface when it was ready, not when emotions demanded it. Another truth lingers beneath the story. Cruelty almost always relies on an audience. It grows when it is laughed at, tolerated, or excused. But it collapses when it is simply recorded and left to stand on its own. Brooke did not argue with Daniel's behavior. She allowed it to be seen exactly as it was. And once it was seen clearly, it no longer needed her voice to explain it. This is not a story about revenge. Revenge seeks to humiliate. This story is about boundaries. Boundaries don't shout. They don't perform. They just exist. And when crossed, they trigger consequences without drama. That is the kind of justice that lasts. If If you take anything from this story, let it be this. You do not owe explanations to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. You do not need to prove your worth in rooms that only respect noise. Sometimes the most powerful choice is to step back, keep your record straight, and let time, truth, and structure do what emotion never could. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what part of Brooke's journey stayed with you the most? And if you appreciate stories about quiet strength, accountability, and real justice, not spectacle, consider subscribing to the channel. We're glad you're here.